Thanks so much, Brent. Appreciate being here.
Great to have you today. We met in Palm Beach. Gosh, it's been almost a month ago, I guess, 2, 3 weeks on our regular Wednesday morning Palm Beach men's group, and I was
That's
just
right.
absolutely enthralled with what you're doing at ECatalyst, and we'll get to that sooner or later, dear listeners. But we always like to start, Tom, with understanding a little bit about our guest background and hearing a little bit about the early life. So tell us a
All
little
right.
bit about where you grew up and what that early family life was like.
Sure. Yeah. No, I grew up in Athens, Georgia, actually. So this
Ah,
was um, lifelong UGA fan.
yep.
I was a UGA fan long before long before they got
Before
really
they
good the
became
last
big.
2 years. Yeah, exactly. So in fact, I was telling my son that I was his age the last time UGA won their national championship back in the Herschel
Nice.
Walker days. So
Nice.
it's kind of fun to see that cycle come back around. But yeah, I grew up. So I grew up in Georgia. I grew up in a family, a church-going family,
Yeah.
not necessarily believers,
Got
but
it.
we went to an Episcopal church every Sunday. It was a fairly moderate Episcopal church,
Yeah.
and I actually came to the Lord through a eighth grade Sunday school teacher.
Yeah. Awesome.
This was a guy that was a charismatic believer that was hanging out in the Episcopal church just to see if he could save a few on the way. And
Good for him.
as
Planting
as
seeds
I
wherever he could. Looking for fertile soil.
exactly, so as I remember it, and I'm not sure that I remember this exactly right, but as I remembered in my eighth grade brain, there was a substitute. The eighth grade Sunday school teacher had to quit at the last minute, and this was the only guy that was available. So they said, "Oh, okay, all right, we'll let him do it," and it
Nice.
changed my life. So.
Nice. That's awesome. What does
Yeah.
mom and dad do? What were their
So
backgrounds?
my father is a mathematics professor,
Oh.
and a quite a good one, though that you
Was he
wouldn't
at
know it.
UGA? Is that why you
He
were
was at
there?
UGA. He was
Okay.
teaching at UGA, but he retired from teaching so he could just do research,
Got
which
it.
means that he travels all over the world, sits in rooms, and thinks with people.
Nice.
But he's one of these guys that there's 12 or 13 people in the world who know what he's talking about
Hmm.
most of the time.
Cool.
So, but nobody else does because it's math
It's
and
math,
nobody
right?
understands, Einstein, at least you could say, well, he figured out that light bends around the sun and everybody can go, oh yeah, light bends around the sun. Nobody can figure out what math does. It doesn't apply to anything. It's just math. So yeah, and my mom was I guess professional
Yeah.
homemaker, but she did a lot of stuff with our school. She worked did a talent and gifted program, kids program
Yeah. Cool.
for a while, and yeah. So
Brothers and sisters?
I have one sister, one
Two
younger
sisters.
sister. She's a
Yeah.
year and a half younger.
What kind of
So
lessons do you remember from mom and dad growing up, or maybe even grandparents?
I mean, I think my parents, again, even though they weren't believers, they really did value church,
Yeah.
and I think there was something about that that really made a difference. I had an uncle, my father's sister's husband was a navigator. He was a guy named Noel Nelson.
Oh,
He had been in Sweden for a number of years, taken his family to Kenya, and then was living in Atlanta, and we would go up there every so often. And he, somewhere around high school, he started discipling me as good
yeah.
navigators do.
Right.
And I mean, he was a dyed in the wool navigator. He wanted to go through the Second Timothy 2:7 series and wanted to like memorize all the verses and everything else. And it was we didn't, because we were far enough away, we didn't have as regular a time together. But I think he was one of those guys that really helped me understand what discipleship really looked like.
Mm,
That,
yeah.
and actually the eighth grade Sunday school teacher continued to disciple me all the way through high school as well.
Nice.
So
Your earliest mentors, huh?
yeah, they really were.
Yeah.
They were my
Yeah.
earliest, and both of them were odd birds in their own way, but they were also quality people.
Right.
My eighth grade Sunday school teacher used to pick me up in his lime green Cadillac, and we would drive around and look at real estate while we would talk about God and the Bible and everything else. That, and we'd go and eat Chinese food at the same Chinese restaurant every single time. I
Wow.
don't know why he picked that, but he was a very large white man, and but he liked his Chinese
He
food.
liked his Chinese food.
So
I love that. Were you a good student in school, Tom?
I was a pretty good student. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think I got to be a much better student once I got to college.
Right.
And I did quite well in college, and then my master's degree I did very, very well. So I think I got better as time went on. But it
Latent.
was, yeah, it was one of the, I think I was looking for my motivation. I really
Yeah.
didn't
Right.
know why I was studying. I was studying in order to get the grades, but that really
Sure.
wasn't enough. And by the time I got to seminary, which is what my master's degree was in, I knew why I wanted to
You
study,
found your
and that
passion.
and that made
Yeah.
that made all the difference in the world.
Yeah. What kind of things did you do outside of class during those elementary and high school years?
I played in the band. I played
Yeah.
trumpet.
Cool.
Gosh, what else did I do? I played soccer at various different times.
Yeah.
Did a lot with like summer camp stuff. So like all through college, I ran summer camps.
Nice. Were they those
Did
Christian camps or were they
Most of them were Christian
Muslim?
camps. Yeah, a
Nice.
lot of
Yeah.
them were coming out of either Episcopal churches. Um, it's interesting. This was before the Anglican Episcopal split, but there was still a lot, especially in the youth programs. There was a lot of really good evangelical stuff happening in the Episcopal Church.
Right.
And then I think when the Anglican sort of church split out of the Episcopal Church, I think the Episcopal Church has kind of gone downhill a lot since then.
Right.
But it was still, there was a lot. My youth group in high school was an Episcopal youth group, but we called it PPP. It was the Polyphilo Progeny. It was Greek for many
Yeah.
loving children, and but it was just a solid group of kids, and there was a thing called happening, which is, I don't know if your listeners may know about Curcio, but happening is, guys, basically the high school version of Curcio. It's a sort of a renewal weekend.
Hmm.
And when I went on that, that's where I really found Christian community for the first time.
Nice.
Like a bunch of other high school students who were on fire for Jesus, who really wanted to understand what following God looked like, and and just we're excited to be followers of Christ. And it
Right. Right.
it that was a powerful time in my life as well.
Very
So
influential. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You obviously are a multiple time serial entrepreneur. What kind of entrepreneurial things were you doing when you were a kid?
Um, when I was a kid, I mean, I mowed lawns a bit.
Yeah.
We My friends and we hustled a few different jobs in a couple different places. I think I first when I got to college, I think was really the first job that I found that I really truly enjoyed, and that was I
Right.
was working in the outdoor club.
Nice.
And so basically, I was leading rock climbing trips and caving trips and all sorts of other things like every weekend. It was the first time that I'd gotten all my work study hours in without,
Right.
even overdid it some. But I don't know that I really found my entrepreneurial groove until a little bit later on in life. I think
So
I
you
was
found your
really,
passion. Yeah.
yeah, I really,
Yeah.
my passion at the time had been more on ministry, and I really wanted to
Right.
work with, I felt a calling to the poor early on. I felt like, and I didn't even know what that meant at the beginning.
Right.
I had
Right.
no idea what that really looked like. It wasn't really until I got out of my master's program. I did about 5 years of social work. I was working with, doing a therapeutic camping program, working with troubled teens down south of Raleigh in North Carolina.
Mm.
We were building our own shelters and living in them year round. It was some of the best leadership training I had ever done. Um, it wasn't entrepreneurial, but it was leadership in a very significant way, and a really challenging kind of leadership, because it was challenging kids. I mean, we take 30-day canoe trips and this kind of thing with these kids that
Nice.
would just be screaming their heads off at night sometimes. But I learned to love them, and there was a part of that I think it really changed not only the way that I led. I think it changed the way that I knew how to love
Yeah.
somebody, because
Yeah.
I could look at a kid and say, Johnny, I am so angry at you right now because you're doing things that is ruining our relationship. And
Mm.
I want a good relationship with you. So I am angry, and to be able to say that to him in a way that says, I'm angry because I love you,
Yeah. Right.
and that's,
Right.
there's a power in that I think was really exciting to understand and to really be able to incorporate in leadership.
And formative for your later work, which we'll get to in a minute.
It
You,
really was, yeah.
you
So
went to Cornell, no slacker of a university, so you must have gotten some good grades in high school.
I did, like I said, I did reasonably well. So yeah.
Why did you choose Cornell?
At the time, I think it seemed like a good school. I
Right.
really, again, I don't think I really knew what I wanted to do back at that time. I knew I wanted to do some kind of ministry. I was studying math for no particular reason. I think
Other than
because
that's what Dad did.
that's
So,
what Dad did, and I was really good at it. I mean, I could actually do it without a lot of effort.
right.
Um, but by the time I hit my junior senior year, I realized that's not enough of a reason to
Yeah.
just go into math.
Yeah.
I realized that I really wanted to be with people. And a lot of the math majors in Cornell were not, they were not people.
Right. Right.
So
Put them in a
that was,
room and slip formulas underneath their door.
yes, they would rather do math and bathe most of the time. So,
Right. Right. Uh, so you obviously was a few years before you went to seminary. What was that first job you took out of Cornell and why?
oh, this was that therapeutic camping program I was telling you
Yeah.
about. So this
Yeah.
was, again, south of Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a Southern Baptist
Yeah.
program, so good Christian program. But it was intense. It was an intense program. We were on 5 days a week, 24 hours a day for,
Wow.
and then we'd have a sort of an time off cabin. But then we'd go on 30-day canoe trips where we wouldn't get any time off. And we were working with really difficult kids. So
Yeah.
it
Now,
was
did they come from poor areas? Were they actually Christian kids themselves? What was their
they
background?
there was a mix. We
Yeah.
got some from DSS. We got some of them from like a church that would say, "Hey, this kid is really needs some help" or something like that. So there was quite a mixture of sources that we got these kids from, but they would all get into the system, and basically we take them off of whatever medication they were on, unless there
Mm.
was something that was unless it was an actual medical condition. But any of the psychotropic stuff, we would take them off of all of that, and then everything was group work.
Wow.
So it was all about two counselors, 10 kids, and then we would build a tent together, cut down pine poles, and then if there was a problem, we would huddle up and say, "Hey, Johnny, what's going on?" He'd say, "Well, Paul's doing this," and we'd have to work it out. Say, "Guys, what do you guys feel about Johnny and Paul having this problem?" And "Oh, we
Right.
don't like it," and it just that kind of we're going to function as a group, or we're not going to function at all. And
How many kids were in the group and how many leaders were there?
so two leaders, 10
Yeah.
kids.
10 kids.
Yeah, and it was so yeah. So when my leader went off, my co-counselor went off. I was on by myself, and vice versa.
Right.
Um, and so we would have up to 10 kids by ourselves.
Yeah.
But because
But
it was
5 to
group
1 would
work,
be a challenge enough. 10 to 1.
well, I mean, if it wasn't for the program worked in such a way that it really was done as a group. So we
Yeah.
would get
Yeah.
something started, and if there was a problem, we'd pull everybody back together. And if we couldn't
Right.
solve the problem there, then we'd go out into the woods a little bit and talk about it there. And if we still couldn't do it, we'd go out into the woods a little bit farther and sit
Right.
down. And we were going to sit there through lunch and dinner if we needed to, and
Whatever it took.
until and whatever it takes until we solve
Yeah.
the problem. And
Yeah.
at some point or another, the group would get motivated to say, "Okay, we need to solve this problem. We're
We're not getting
hungry."
out of here until this is solved.
Exactly. So it really was an effective program, and it was amazing the changes that we saw in the kids. The kids
Yeah.
really did grow a lot, and the leaders grew a lot. I mean,
Right. Right.
I still look back at that time and think, man, I can't imagine a better kind of leadership training school than that was in a lot of
What
ways.
were some of the leadership lessons you took away from that experience, Tom?
Well, I think I told you before that the capacity to be angry or frustrated at something and still love the person in the middle
Yeah.
of it. I think
Yeah.
that's a huge thing. I think as leaders, I see too many leaders in the U.S. right now on both sides who delve into not just anger but almost hatred of the other side.
Mm.
And I don't think it's helpful, and I don't think it's Christian.
It's not
I feel
biblical.
it's not
That's
biblical,
for
right?
sure.
I mean, there's a way to be angry at another person's positioning or ideas
Yeah.
without hating the
Right.
person.
It's still
And
love.
I
Yeah.
think we've got to find a way to do that
Yeah.
in American politics.
Well,
So,
and not just there, but globally too, right? Across countries.
absolutely,
And you've got some
absolutely,
experience with that.
yeah.
So you went on to seminary, and it looks like
Uh-huh.
a couple of years, 4 or 5 years, I guess, after you graduated.
Yep.
You chose Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary.
Hmm.
What was your thinking behind that?
It was that was a God thing.
Yeah.
I looked at Gordon Conwell, I looked at Fuller, I looked at Trinity Evangelical out in Chicago, and really narrowed it down to Gordon Conwell and Trinity. And then was leaning towards Trinity, but I kept trying to find people that I could talk to who had been to Trinity. And every person I went to, Ravi Zacharias had been to Trinity, and so I
Yeah.
called Ravi Zacharias' office and said, "Hey, could I talk to Mr. Zacharias about Trinity?" And the guy's like, "Well, he's not here, but I went to Gordon Conwell." And this happened like over and over, where like
Wow.
every time I tried to talk to somebody about Trinity, I wound up talking to somebody from Gordon Conwell. Finally went to Gordon Conwell and was just smitten. And I felt like,
Yeah.
I don't need, I never actually visited Trinity.
Right. Right.
So it was just, it was a God thing for sure.
Did you look at Fuller as well? You
I
mentioned
did
that.
look at Fuller. My sister went to Fuller actually.
Right.
And yeah, I think, yeah, I can't remember exactly why I ruled that out, but I remember ruling Fuller out fairly
God
early on.
wasn't pointing in
Yeah.
that direction.
It just wasn't pointing in the right, and it wasn't about Fuller as a
Yeah.
school. It
Sure.
was more the context and everything else. So
The confirmation. And then
yeah.
what did you use? You went right into campus ministry after that, correct?
I went into campus ministry for, yeah, just about a year.
Yeah.
I had a guy that kind of recruited me into the Navigators because I wanted to go overseas. I wanted to go to the Middle East. And his recruitment message was, well, why don't we, we were losing a leader at BU. BU had just gotten started in the Nav ministry. We need somebody to sort of take over and to sort of babysit it for a little while.
Mm.
You want to get into Navigators. Why don't you spend a year babysitting the Navigator ministry at BU, and then you can go overseas? And we
Yeah.
said, okay. So that's what I did.
So
And
you had when we met a few weeks ago, you said you had an early attraction to the Middle East, and you
yes,
studied and learned Arabic. What kind of generated that? What brought that about?
well,
Desire.
I wanted to go to I mean, I felt a commitment through seminary to the lost, to places that are truly unreached. And when I feel like calling people lost to some extent. I know I tend to like look at it from the way that people would hear that, and I feel like that can be a little condescending. But I do
Mm.
think that there's a place where there's something about the gospel, as you and I know, that is so transformative,
Yeah.
and I want people to have the option of considering it,
Mm.
and so I feel like I can even go to my Muslim friends and say, look, I know you don't get this, and I know that there's history here, but I really just want you to consider this. This is
Mm.
something that's worth thinking about, and it's meant something to me. So, I felt like I actually did a 7 month trip around. Basically, it was all the way a full lap around the world. Started in the Middle East. I assumed I was going to be in Southeast Asia someplace.
All right.
And again, this was just kind of random. Oh, it looked kind of interesting. Went to India for about 4 months. Lived in Varanasi, which is sort of the Mecca of Hinduism in a lot of ways.
Wow.
That I thought was just fascinating stuff. It was really fell in love with the culture there in some ways. And then went to Southeast Asia, and I realized as much as Thailand is a beautiful place, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, gorgeous areas. There's also a very strong saving face culture, and
Yeah.
I tend to be kind of in your face as my personality a
Right.
little bit.
Right. Right.
And I just realized, man, I'm going to be a bull in a china shop. I'm going to be doing anything but bearing witness to Jesus in this kind of context,
Well, the
especially
Arabs
as
kind of have that too, though. The Arabs have that saving place. It's maybe
they
not
they
quite as
do, but
apparent, but
it's different. It's
yeah.
different with the
Yeah.
Arabs. They can get loud and argue about
Right.
politics and everything else, but it's always about something that's over there. And as
Yeah.
soon as the
Right.
argument's over, we give each other a big hug, and
Yeah.
we proclaim our love for each other, and we're still just as good friends as we were at the beginning of it, as long as the argument is about each other.
Right.
And
Right.
that's part of the way the Arabs do it, is that they don't say they save face in any kind of direct confrontation, but they have no problem talking loudly about politics all day long,
Right.
which
Right.
is really kind of a fun part of the culture. So I felt like I could jump into that in a way that we can just get into these heated discussions,
Yeah.
but at the same time we love each other, and I just that was just a great part of that culture.
And was followed actually by some time where you were working in business in that part of the world, right? You had a
Yeah, I
couple of
mean,
jobs.
really, when I got out of seminary, I knew I probably needed to start learning, business because I was going to be overseas, and so I started a graphic design company, and found that I did it more as a business person doing graphic design, wound up hiring graphic designers, but found I was really good at it and
Yeah.
and really enjoyed it. And so by the time I got to the Middle East, I wasn't just doing business because I wanted to have something to do or an identity that I could lean into. I really wanted to do business. And the more that we got into it, the more I realized too that if you're going to an unreached area and you just put up a sign, a shingle over an office someplace, people around you know it.
Hmm.
They see what you're doing. You may fool the government, but you're not going to fool your neighbor. The
Right.
neighbor can look at you and say, "You're not making any money. How are you living here?" And
Right.
there's a disingenuousness about that reality. So if you're not genuinely doing business, people sense an inauthenticity about who you are. And I
Particularly in that
realized,
part of the world.
and
Mm.
particularly in
Yeah.
that part of the world.
Yeah.
So there really was a sense in which I wanted to be a businessman, not just in name, but in process. And so I
Yeah.
wound up doing some construction. I also started a water bottling business with an Emirati and an Omani guy. We've probably investigated 10 or 15 other businesses as well.
Mm.
But that construction business took me all over the Middle East. I'm selling acoustic walls and ceilings for Owens Corning, half a dozen other companies that had in my portfolio. And it was a fantastic business because we got into some of the biggest hospitals in Qatar. We got into this huge theater in Beirut, a couple of the airports.
Mm.
There's a lot of building going on in the Gulf. And even though it didn't take a huge amount of my time, because we got into these great projects, I could go into a room full of business guys and say, "Oh yeah, we did the Dubai airport," and they're like,
Right.
"Oh,
Oh,
now I'll make this
got their
race here,"
attention.
And it
Yeah.
it really did provide a sense of identity for who I was and what I was doing.
Yeah. Awesome. And you lived a total of about 10, 12 years in the Middle East, off and on, obviously, but you were in UAE and Dubai. What
hmm
what was kind of your total time on the ground down there?
So we
What
were
did you spend?
almost 10 years. We
Almost
we
10
were
years. Mm.
beginning of 2006 until the end of 2015.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we lived primarily in Oman, which is just
Right.
across the border from UAE, but about an hour and a half from Dubai.
Were you in Muscat or in another
No.
region?
Muscat was actually 4 hours away from us. So
Oh my
Oman is a
gosh.
much larger country than
Yeah.
the Emirates is. And we were right on the border with the Emirates. So we were much closer to Dubai, even though we were in the next country over.
Got it. Got it. Cool. Cool. And is that where you learned Arabic, or had you studied it in the U.S. before going over?
I really hadn't studied much of it. I
Yeah.
studied some before I got there, but um, Arabic's a strange language. There's really kind of
Yeah.
two Arabics. There's the formal Arabic, which everything, like all the newscasts are in, all the presidential speeches, Bugs
Right.
Bunny, I mean,
Right.
anything that's formally done is going to be in this very formal Arabic, but nobody speaks that on the street.
Right.
So you have to learn the formal if you're going to read anything, or if you're going to
Right.
write anything, or if you're going to listen to anything official. But the spoken has to be learned place by place.
And is it different in each place? I know
It
Egyptian
is.
is very
Yeah.
different, and was the Arabic different in Dubai than it was in Oman?
Not so much. I mean, across the Gulf, there were minor differences. There were
Right.
definitely regional differences. You could hear in the pronunciation. Dajaj means chicken in Arabic, and in the Emirates they would say diyaya, and in Muscat they would say dagaga. Um, so there's
It'd be hard to know
differences.
what you're eating at any one
Right,
time.
exactly. So there were some differences in pronunciation,
Right.
but really you saw a much bigger difference, like if you went to Lebanon or if you went to
Yeah.
Egypt. Baghdad, I was in Baghdad a while back, and Baghdad, the Arabic was completely different because it was mixed with a lot of Farsi.
Sure.
So yeah, so it's I think the Gulf is a little bit closer to a lot of the formal Arabic, which made it both easier for me to speak to kind of anybody else listening, whether or not
Right.
I could understand them as well.
How did your ministry kind of, weave its way through all the businesses that you were running and setting up in that part of the world?
Well, I mean, again, I feel like I think my view of what ministry looks like changed as I went on. I think, there's this idealism when you first go over on the mission field, quote unquote, where you have this idea that you're there to, convert somebody or something like
Right.
that. And I think
Right.
as I went along, I realized more and more this is the work of the Holy Spirit. This isn't me.
Right.
Um, I'm here to participate in God's work. And secondly, ministry is not just what you do with your words, it's what you do with everything.
Mm.
Um, so,
And how you're observed as well.
yeah, and
Right.
how you're observed.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like, my wife and I had prayed through Jeremiah 29, and not 11, where, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. That's the one that everybody has their life verse on. But before that, Jeremiah is really talking about to the exiles, to the people who are about to be exiles, and saying, "Look, you guys are going.
You're right.
Exile is coming. It's not
Right.
even all your fault. It's all your fathers and your grandfathers, and it's all their fault. But exile is about to happen. But when you get there, the peace of that land will be your peace. The prosperity of that land will be your prosperity. So
Mm.
pray for the peace of that land and bear witness to who God is in the way that you contribute to that society."
Mm.
And I felt like that's, even says, give your daughters away in marriage and take daughters for your sons. That this is a life wide thing, and it's life on life. And whether our calling is to love people, whether or not they ever receive the message of the gospel.
That's right.
We've got to love them first. If they receive it, it's even a greater love because I'm giving them something which is so valuable to me and of such transformative power towards me. But even if they don't, our calling is no less than to love.
Yeah.
So I just felt like, that's the way that I want to think about ministry, is loving people in a way that really makes them glad that I'm there.
It's awesome. So we mentioned in the introduction, you're CEO and executive director of ECatalyst. That's how kind of you and I got introduced. You're telling us about
That's
that.
right.
Want to hear about that, but tell us what kind of led you to ECatalyst, because it's a very, very unique nonprofit slash for-profit, if I can say
Yes,
that,
that's true.
organization.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, this goes all the way back to my time. I think I told this story at the Florida men's group, but it goes all the way back to my time where I just felt like I wanted to work with the poor.
Yeah.
And it was kind of insane that I wound up in the Gulf, which is there's some of the wealthiest people in the world
That's
there,
right.
and
Right.
there were several times I'd be sitting in this room full of, young professionals, and I'd be looking around and thinking, these guys have more money than I'm ever going to see. Um, what are you doing with me here, God? I mean, I thought I was supposed to be going to the poor, and we could talk about spiritually poor or something else, but it just didn't feel like it was the same thing.
Right.
But going back, my junior year, I went to Haiti, and this was a kind of a desire. This is me wanting to go out and serve the poor somehow or another, and I was going to find them, dog it, and I was gonna serve them somehow. Um, and so I wrote to a person in my church, who wrote a letter to a pastor, who wrote a letter to another pastor, and then it came back up the chain, and then and they said basically, yeah, show up with the sign. So I flew down there and showed up with a sign, which turns out I didn't need it because I was the only white guy in the plane.
Right.
Um, and then I got driven 4 hours up into the mountains in Haiti,
Uh-huh.
where I then had to figure out what I was doing there
Mm.
because I had no idea as a young 20-something guy.
Right.
But I taught English, I taught music. I wound up learning Creole. Creole is an extremely easy language as opposed to Arabic, which is a much more very,
Right.
very difficult language. I actually preached in Creole by the time I was done.
Wow.
Um, but my English teaching was horrible. I really did a very, very bad job. Um, and but my biggest inspiring story was this was something I just never imagined. I was sitting around after an English class with a couple of teenage guys. So these guys were like 3 or 4 years younger than I was, and I was supposedly ministering to them. And we're talking about, well, what do you want to be, when you grow up, as it were? And I said, I want to work with Moon Keep-Off, people who are poor.
Mm.
And I still remember that phrase. And they said, great. What are you going to do? And I realized that nobody's ever asked me that question
Right. You
before.
had to take it to the
And
next
here
step.
I
Yeah.
am trying to
Yeah.
teach English, and I'm really bad at it. So that's probably not what I need to do. So what do I do? Um, and this began something of a 30-year journey of trying to figure out, well, what do I do? What am I really offering people? Because these guys, I think I had bought into this fantasy, the videos where you see a white guy show up at a African village and all the Africans are very, very, very happy. And it just seems like everything has just gotten better because the white guy showed up. And that was my fantasy. I thought, I just need to show up and things are just going to get better because I'm an American and I'm white or whatever. And I realized these guys sitting in front of me, they didn't want my fantasy.
Mm.
They didn't want to be a part of a fantasy of mine. They wanted things to be different. And it wasn't just that they wanted stuff, though they would be happy to take stuff. If I could give them food and they'd be less hungry in their poverty, or I could get them a new roof for their hut, which means
Right.
that they would be drier in their poverty. But their situation wasn't changing.
Yeah.
And what these guys wanted more than anything else was that the situation could be different.
Yeah.
Because the problem with poverty is not just that you're poor. It's not just that you lack stuff. It's that there's no hope. It's
Yeah.
not just, poor is the lack of stuff. Poverty is the lack of hope. It's the fact that I live on a dirt floor hut. My kids are going to live on a dirt floor hut. My grandkids are going to live on a dirt floor hut. Nothing is ever going to change because we have no way out.
Right.
That's what poverty really does. And so I realized, man, if I'm going to do something like these guys are asking me to do, I want to do something that's going to change things. I want to provide something that, not in some kind of colonialist or condescending way, but in the sense of, is there something that I can do that would really help them transform their own lives?
Right.
And I think that's where ECatalyst really came out, was after having done all this business and realizing that I'm actually really good at business, that transformation, business, entrepreneurship changes people because it gives them a sense of identity. It gives them a sense of who they are as people. It gives them a sense of dignity and purpose rather than giving them a handout where they feel like, oh, good, the white guy gave me something again. Now I can live a little bit longer.
I'll come back when they come back. Yeah.
Nobody likes to be dependent.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to wait for somebody else to come along to make life better. People want to make their own lives better. And these guys wanted that. I think most people want that. And so I feel like this is what entrepreneurship does. And so ECatalyst, to some extent, what we're talking about is entrepreneurial ecosystems. And what that means is not just starting some businesses, especially as a expat worker coming in and starting a business of yours that you can then hire some people, helping them start their businesses, but not just helping them start one business or two businesses or three businesses, but trying to create an environment where business creation becomes possible for everybody. Because then you can create viral business growth and you can start seeing real transformation. That's what the entrepreneurial ecosystem does. It's like the petri dish in biology class in 8th grade when it's not just planting one piece of fungi here, there, elsewhere. It's about letting the environment just create spontaneous bubbling growth. If you can do that with entrepreneurship, create jobs, create wealth, create ownership, now you're starting to really change poverty for good.
Great story. I mean, I love that whole thing. And as you
Sure.
know, when we met, I was just enraptured by it because so often, when you hear the nonprofit pitch, it's okay, we need to give, give, give.
Mm-hmm.
And then you always wonder, gosh, what happens and what the changes are.
Right.
So you went to Ethiopia
Uh-huh.
and pick up the story from there. What led you to that location and, kind of kicking things off and bring us up to speed on, what the current challenges are with the organization?
Sure. Well, I mean, we didn't start in Ethiopia actually. We've only been around for about 3 years, but we
Right.
started actually in India. We did some online stuff in India. Got a chance to try out some of the programming. Realized we really need to do this in person, and COVID didn't let us do that, unfortunately. There. But then we did get some stuff going on in Rwanda inside the Episcopal Church, or not the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church that's there. Believe it, great body of people. Don't necessarily get for-profit enterprise.
Right.
Especially in a place like Rwanda, where there's been so much charity sort of poured in, it's really hard to get mindsets re-wrapped around the idea of really building something and doing it as a for-profit. Churches tend to want to give money out, and they want to do it as
Mm,
charity, and that's not a bad thing. It's just it's not helping create sustainable enterprise.
yeah.
So I think what we really learned there was that we need to build this in the space where the entrepreneurs are, and then bring the church alongside rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
It's not bringing the
Yeah.
entrepreneurs into the church; it's bringing the church out into the space where the entrepreneurs are. So
Right.
that's part of what we felt we learned from Rwanda. We still have got some leaders there that really want to keep moving, and I really feel like there's work yet to be done there in Rwanda, and I'm looking forward to getting back. But in Ethiopia, we got started in summer of 20 end of 2021. We started a couple of big events. January 2022, we got our first cohort started with 20 entrepreneurs. That cohort is still going on. It's got
Wow.
12 to 15 entrepreneurs. Several of those are teams. We've got 7 businesses that have spun off, all of which are beginning to grow and are beginning to look for investment. Well, not all of them are looking for investment. A couple of them are bootstrapping, as they should. But it's a very exciting process. We've got a great team in Ethiopia too, which is part of the reason that I really like what we're doing there, is that the leadership that's there gets the entrepreneurial space, and they get the
Right.
space where we're talking about sharing faith not as preaching or giving out tracts or something like that, but just talking about who we are as believers and as entrepreneurs, and why
Yeah.
entrepreneurship. I mean, entrepreneurship is an identity shaking reality. You're taking a risk. You're putting your livelihood and your identity on the line. You know, so there's a real place where entrepreneurs are asking the hard questions of, who am I really? What is it that's valuable in my life? And so the gospel is a place, I feel like the gospel is a place that we can share with entrepreneurs, that really they're asking the questions that the gospel is the answer to. And that's what gets me excited about that. So so the Ethiopia, we just feel like we've got the opportunity to build this model, and I can tell you a little bit about that model too, if you want, um, of of ecosystem development there in
Right.
Ethiopia in a way that I'm getting more and more excited about.
Yeah. So exciting. Well, we are almost just about out of time,
Are we
but
okay?
we'll have to save that story for another podcast because I hope to be able to join you there someday soon.
Absolutely, I would love to have you come
And
out,
get a
Brad.
chance to get a feeling for it. I just think it's, teaching them how to fish rather than fishing for them, right?
Absolutely.
It's a wonderful direction. Well, we always ask our CEO guests, and I'm going to modify this a little bit for us, but you've just been so passionate about this and in really helping to help others overcome poverty. What career life advice would you give someone that maybe also has a passion like this in the nonprofit world and in helping others? What would you suggest they do as they think about, how they find their path?
Well, a couple of different things. First of all, if somebody really wants to get into the nonprofit space, I would say, we've got to take a really good hard look at our own motivations, because there's a real place where, as I was when I was in Haiti, we want to come in as kind of saviors, and we feel like somehow
Right,
we have that
right.
positional advantage, and that's a bad place to come in. People
Hmm.
will accept that because they want your stuff. But I think what we really need to do is figure out how to get underneath the people we're trying to serve, and figure out ways to help them do what it is that they can do to create something. Because when they create it, it'll keep going. If we
Yeah,
create it, it's only there as long as we're there. So we
right.
really need to help local people, whatever that local is, whether it's Atlanta or whether it's, Ethiopia, help them figure out what it is that they want to build, and then help them build that. If we can do that sustainably, especially as business where they're making revenue and therefore able to sustain themselves, then that will continue as long as they have the passion for it.
Yeah. Love it, Tom. Well, listen, really appreciate your time. Wonderful, wonderful journey. And well, this is the first stop, first segment. I definitely want to hear a lot more as things
Sure.
go by. Tom Carlson, CEO and Executive Director of ECatalyst, thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. This has been an absolute pleasure.